The way that I looked at it, I thought it was kind of a lateral move, even when the move happened. I didn't really ever look at Sam Bradford as being someone that was necessarily a major upgrade over what they had, whether you were looking at it being Foles or whether you were looking at it being Sanchez at the quarterback spot. Bradford is someone that's generally always been injured. I mean, he's missed the last 2 games now with an injury. That's been the biggest knock on him. The only benefit that he really has, he's got that, that first-round pick draft pedigree to him. But if you really looked at him play in St. Louis, has there really been anything that stood out? And the answer with that was no. So I kind of looked at that as a lateral move where they took on, about probably $10 to $11 million in salary, pretty much for no good reason. I didn't really get that. I didn't see how he was going to fit the offense. I didn't see how he was going to necessarily drive the football down the field. I didn't know how he was going to be in any way able to really run the read option for them. I didn't think he'd be able to run even a very fast-paced offense. I just didn't see any of that in St. Louis. And so I don't know if they were blinded by that number 1 overall pick grade on him, or if they really thought they were going to be able to flip him for Mariota, which to me also had no possibility of happening. So I just thought it was a questionable decision just because of the numbers involved.
Yeah, and one thing with that is, I think when you look at expectations for the Eagles in terms of people saying, wow, this could be a Super Bowl contender, which some people believe, some people did not, I think it just stems to this move here, that if you won 10 games with Nick Foles, even if you got a slight upgrade at that position from Bradford to Foles, that could be worth a win or two. And as you said, that maybe that risk wasn't worth the overall reward.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially now. I mean, obviously, it's much easier to say in hindsight, but when you see the other holes on the team, that's a lot of money that could have gone elsewhere to patch some spots up that, haven't worked out too well.
All right, Jason Fitzgerald, overthecap.com. Let's go to the Murray one because, I had no problem with the McCoy, and I think you wrote the same thing. I had no problem with McCoy if you're telling me that position, too much money, we can go draft a guy. And I said, look, at you get a guy off the street, Langford and Charchandrick West, guys that no one ever heard of coming into this season, and they're all producing. But then what you did with Murray is almost a crime.
That was one of the most shocking moves of free agency really that I can recall in some time, specifically for the Eagles. That was not the kind of move that I'm used to their front office making. They've only really done that, I feel like, once recently with the Asamoah deal a couple of years back. I looked at this one as a pure, what I call a frustration buy. They wanted Frank Gore. They had a deal in place for him, and that made sense. That was a lower-cost player that they thought would fit their system pretty well. So I kind of like that where they were going with that. He reneges on the deal, so they go out and they go for Ryan Matthews, which, again, that's a fine move for them, and he's been pretty good when he's been healthy. Always the knock on him has been health as well. But then out of left field, they just go out there and they decide to go for DeMarco Murray. And I think that was you're left with egg on your face, and a lot of people are saying, now you've gone from Frank Gore, who's a big-name player, to Ryan Matthews, who hasn't really had that kind of career. And I think they just went out there and they decided, okay, we're going to get this guy who really wasn't getting a lot of interest, at least at the price that he was looking for, it seemed like, around the league. And I think that was really the big thing there, because I don't think the Eagles were the ones that probably initiated that. I have to think that came from Murray's side, where they saw the situation unfolding with Philadelphia, and they were having a problem getting the deal done with Dallas that they really wanted. And I think they came to Philadelphia and said, hey, our guy is here. He's ready to switch teams. And it just led to a really, really bad contract, I think, that really I think was the worst move that they made because, again, I don't see how he fit in with the roster. You can see the kind of plays they run with him. It just doesn't work. And I think they should have known that, because I believe most of the teams around the league, which is why Murray, despite the fact that he had so many yards the year before, was having a problem getting that high-level salary, that $8 million salary a year that they were looking for. Because you looked at Dallas and you looked at the power that they have in their offensive line. You looked at Murray's age. You looked at the fact that he's pretty much primarily seems to be a north-south runner. And a lot of teams, I think, were scared off by that, at least at these kind of dollar figures. And so it was pretty surprising that Philadelphia, who, you look at a lot of the things Chip Kelly's done, especially with the receiver position, believes a lot of the stuff is plug and play. Why in the world would you go out and spend that kind of money for Murray? And that one's just been that's just a bad move for all parties involved.
What has it done financially to this team? I mean, in terms of moving forward now that you have Murray, because, I would assume you say, well, Murray's just not a fit, we can cut him. Well, that's just not going to be the case here, as opposed to if they would still have had McCoy around.
Yeah, basically what they did is they traded off salary in this case. Basically, the salaries probably would have been about even, give or take a little bit. But in the case of, keeping McCoy, they could have just cut McCoy next year. There would have been no ramifications on it. He only had $1 million left remaining in terms of guarantees on his contract. And now with Murray, I think he's got, it's $20 million total guaranteed off the top of my head. I know his salary's fully guaranteed next year, and then there's a little bit guaranteed the year thereafter. So you've basically locked yourself into him unless you can find somebody to trade for him. And right now he's been so bad this year, I can't imagine that trade market is really going to develop for him.
Jason Fitzgerald, overthecap.com. We are looking back at the Eagles' roster decisions. Chip Kelly, the GM, the Maxwell deal, and many people understand in free agency you are going to overpay for guys. Number one, do you hold the GM accountable sometimes, though, where you see a guy like Maxwell and understand this guy just doesn't, much like Murray, fit into my system? Yes, I understand he might be the best guy out there, but he's not going to fit into what we do. How much accountability does the GM hold for that? And number two, how locked in are they to this guy?
I think you definitely have to hold the GM accountable in this case, because I think when you make a lot of these moves, especially a move for a player like Maxwell, if you go back 1 year, where did you rate him a year before? Where did you think he was going to project salary-wise? You don't want to read that much into the 1 year free agency, contract year play. And, again, much like Murray, he's coming from a player, from a team with a great system. He's playing across from Richard Sherman. They've got two of the best safeties in the NFL there. So it's not that he is not a good player. It's just that he needs a specific kind of system, I think, to fit into, to where he can be a really good number two corner. That decision to make him a number one and play him the way that you're playing him, it's just meant for disaster. And when you get a guy making this kind of money, it just looks so bad for him, and it really, it brings a lot of heat on the general manager from the fans, from the media, from people watching from the outside, because you kind of scratch your head and say, how didn't you see this? This is your job. What were you looking at? And, it's one of the difficulties with free agency, projecting how a player is going to fit. One of the things that the Eagles did so good for so many years was they were always big on extending their own players, because with those players you have 2-year audition, 3-year audition. You know how they're going to fit in your system. You know how they're going to fit within your team culture. You know all that. When you go into free agency, you're taking a risk. And, again, you ask yourself, what did they see with him? What really did he do in those 16 games last year that made them jump in this, jump in the evaluation process to say this guy is from a 2 to a bona fide number 1?
Jason, you talk about re-signing your own. Let's go to Macklin. And I don't know, many people think that of all the moves, letting him walk might have been the biggest problem that this team has had on the offensive side of the ball. What are some of the things that went into this, both on the field and financially?
Well, from a financial standpoint, I understand kind of why they did it. All along I realized that Macklin was probably going to get a pretty good contract once he got out there in free agency, because there were going to be desperate teams like the Chiefs. But I understand when you look at his production and you look really where he rates, which is probably more as a 1A than a true number 1, I can see where you would say, you know what, we can't pay more than $8 million a year, $9 million a year for a player like that. I kind of understand that. But then when you go back and you kind of look at what the role that he played in the offense last year, being that guy that kind of opened things up by going deep down the field, helping out the quarterbacks that way, helping the guys get the yards after catch underneath, and you see what you had on the roster to fill in for him. Riley Cooper, a couple draft picks that were still kind of unproven. you kind of ask yourself, for us, maybe we needed to be like the Chiefs. Maybe for us, that $11 million is worth it because of the role that he would have played here. Yeah, around the league, he's not that elite level talent, but for us, he probably would have been the closest that we would have had to it. So I think they probably made a mistake with that one, seeing where the roster was and the role that he would have played, because it's definitely hurt not having him open up the field and replacing him with a guy like Austin who just drops so many passes. Just is not that level of player. And, they could have foregone his $2.3 million salary this year and had Macklin, and, maybe those things would have balanced out.
Yeah, and obviously, as you mentioned, if you can argue financial reasons, but if you don't sign Murray to the deal you do, and even if you do bring in Maxwell and Bradford, you can overpay. You could afford to overpay Macklin a little bit if you just choose not to sign Murray.
Well, yeah, I think that's one of the difficult things with the argument that they'll make on saying that he wasn't worth that money. And, what I'll say is fine. That's all well and good if you want to say we don't have the cap space to do it, we don't have the financial flexibility to do that. But I think when you go out and you make those same kind of questionable calls at other positions for players that you've never seen before, I think that's a lot riskier, especially at the running back position where, like you said before, a lot of those guys are a dime a dozen. And they would have been much better off, holding on to that rather than taking up the Murray money.
All right, Jason Fitzgerald, overthecap.com. So, what kind of situation are the Eagles in moving forward? Chip Kelly, the GM, presumably if he stays, how easy or tough will this be to fix?
Well, they're going to have money to fix it. They should have somewhere in the ballpark next year of $35 million probably in cap room once they move a couple guys out. But I think what you saw this year is free agency didn't work for them. And if it's Chip Kelly, the GM, maybe you got to pull the reins in a little bit on whatever he saw. Self-evaluate a little bit, see what you did wrong, why you targeted these players, and make sure you don't do that again. I think they just need to go back to kind of finding those good depth players and filling out their roster that way. Don't get in over your head with some of these big name players, because I don't think that's going to work for them. I do believe if Chip stays on as the head coach, I think they have to get a different quarterback in there. There's never a lot of guys out there at quarterback, so I think you're going to have to trust in this case the system that he wants to run, and you're going to have to go out there and probably get what's considered a reclamation project, a Kaepernick, a Robert Griffin, maybe Johnny Manziel.
Yikes!
Someone like that. I think that's probably the kind of chance you're going to have to take. I mean, you can't go out there with Sanchez next year. The team hasn't responded to him at all this season. That kind of surprised me. I thought he would have done a little bit better than he did. Maybe it's bad circumstances, but I don't think you can come back with him. And I don't think you really want to commit to Bradford if Bradford's going to try and get $12, $13, $14 million a year, even if it's just for the next 2 years, given his injury history and given, just the way that he's played this year. Just so many turnovers and just nothing imaginative with the offense. It's just plodding along pretty much with him.
Well, Jason, good piece. It's a very detailed piece, much more so than what we discuss here. He's at Jason_OTC. The website is overthecap.com, which breaks down, salary cap, player contracts, and stuff like that in the NFL. Jason, good stuff, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Mike.